A whole new world. Jasmine and a genie. The sun rose above the palace of Agrabah, seeming to dim before the golden-white greatness of the house of the Sultan. The Princess Jasmine was seething. She had, in fact, been seething since the evening before, since the boy she had been just about to kiss was whisked away by the guards, since she had stalked back to the palace on foot herself, not caring who saw her. When she had arrived at the palace, Jasmine immediately demanded to be taken to the royal prison, where mostly harmless troublemakers and tax evaders were kept. The boy was not there. She demanded to be taken to the dungeon, where thieves, goat stealers, and murderers were locked up. The boy was not there. Losing patience, she demanded to be taken to the secret royal obulate, where the worst rapists, enemies of the state, and caravan raiders were thrown to be forgotten, forever. Reluctantly, a pair of the stoutless guards, armed with 2 skipters apiece, took her down to investigate. The boy was not there. So she had started questioning the guards themselves. The younger ones, the lower-ranked ones, clearly had no idea about the boy or anything that had happened. Those higher in command were evasive. The ones who had actually brought the boy in could not be found, and Rasul was silent in the matter. "My lips are sealed," he said somewhat apologetically, "by orders of Jafar himself." "He's not an enemy of the state or a spy," Jasmine cried, exasperated. She almost lost her temper and stomped her foot like the angry little girl she felt like. "He's just a boy, a harmless boy who was showing me around Agrabah." Rasul continued to say nothing, but his eyes betrayed something in this last thing she said. Jasmine realized with horror where this whole thing, and boy, was going. "I was not going to run off with him," she yelled. "Probably. He wasn't going to... We weren't going to..." Rasul looked uncomfortable. She composed herself quickly. "I will go find Jafar and clear this up immediately," she said, stalking off. "As you will, your highness," Rasul called after her, but he sounded relieved. Several hours later, Jasmine had failed to find the father's creepy advisor. If she had known better, she would have thought he was purposely hiding from her in her wrath. It was time to see her father, officially, and make some princessy demands. "He will no doubt be in his playroom," she growled. Then she stopped. "Study," she said, correcting herself. Who knew who was listening? She stalked down the halls, not caring who heard the stomp of her feet in her silk slippers. Seething and trying to track down the boy hadn't left her for a chance to bathe or change since the night before. Her thick black hair was coming out of its brands. Tendrils waved before her like snakes. She scratched the side of her nose with a very unprincessy rub of the back of her hand. She had sweated in the hot streets of the market and the quarter of the street rats, and it had dried. The feeling of it still being there and not immediately washed off was new to her. Not bad, necessarily, but new. She threw open the carved doors to the giant, airy study, where her father spent all of his time since her mother had passed away. She sighed as she passed the table with the giant clockwork model of Agrabah, whose tiny water clock really did work, making miniature suns and moons rise and fall with the day. She rolled her eyes at the colorful silk kites hanging from the ceiling that were brought from the far east and looked like dragons. She found her father with his latest toy, an intricate balancing game that came from somewhere in the far west. Tiny carved animals like puzzle pieces had to be placed carefully on top of each other in descending order of size, finishing with the mouse. Currently he had a yellow duck in his hand and was frowning at it. "Father," she said politely, trying not to startle him. She ground her teeth and reined in her impatience. "Oh, Jasmine," the Sultan said, beaming. He was a fat little man with a beard as white as the snow on top of the far-off mountains. He had been old when he married Jasmine's mother, but the white was less then, merely streaks of clouds on the same dark mountains. His turban was also white and topped with a smooth round ruby and an iridescent blue feather. Cloth of gold trimmed his robes, and the turquoise decorated his sash. He paused, taking her in. Her own turquoise pants were dusty and had a tear near her ankle. Her sash was askew. Her top might have been turned just a little. "Dearest, is everything all right?" Jasmine took a deep breath and smoothed back her hair around her face, at least. "No, father, everything is not all right. I slipped out of the palace last night." "Jasmine!" her father admonished. She took a deep breath and continued. "And Jafar had his guards arrest a boy who saved me from having my hand cut off in the market." The Sultan blinked. "Jafar," she began again slowly, "had his guards arrest a boy." "Your hand cut off?" the Sultan said in something between the outraged yell of a Sultan and the shriek of a father. It was a misunderstanding, Jasmine said, waving her still-attached hand like it was nothing. A big misunderstanding, she allowed, thinking about it for a moment. Like not understanding how things work in the world outside these walls. Money, poverty, the cost of an apple. The point is, he saved me. Jafar did? No, the boy, she said finally, unable to conceal her impatience anymore. A boy, I didn't know his name, stopped a merchant from cutting my hand off, and then was showing me around Agrabah, and Jafar had him arrested. You went off of the palace unescorted? Which is probably why Jafar had the boy arrested, Jasmine said through gritted teeth. But he wasn't hurting me, he was helping me, and he deserves a reward, not to be locked up, and I can't find him, and I'm worried. The Sultan looked at his daughter wordlessly for a moment. Well, he finally said, I haven't heard anything about an arrest, but I shall speak to Jafar about this immediately. Thank you, Jasmine said, bowing her head. And while we're on the subject of getting your hand almost chopped off, the Sultan continued, a little bit of a growl in his throat, let's talk about you leaving the palace, unescorted, running away. Well, I guess it's irrelevant because Jafar can apparently track my every move, Jasmine growled back. Ah, yes, I shall thank Jafar for that, you can be sure. Thank me for what, your majesty? Jasmine glowered as Jafar swept into the room, cool as a melon. She had been looking for him all morning, and yet here he was, suddenly, almost as if he had been summoned, dressed from head to foot as usual in black and red, pointy shouldered cape over his robes, and high white collar, as if it wasn't high summer in the desert city of Agrabah, tapping his long staff with the cobra head and its evil eyes, frightening to some. It looked like a bit of a theatrical silliness to Jasmine. At least that stupid parrot wasn't around. On anyone else, the effication of such a ridiculous bird might have been endearing. On Jafar, it was just another sign of his near insanity. The brightly colored thing often sat on his shoulders all day, sometimes eating the crackers her own father delightfully offered it, and then it relieved itself down to the back of Jafar's otherwise immaculate cloak. Long, white, disgusting streaks. No one in the palace or city dared to say a word about it. Who knew what an expensive tapestry it was chewing on or ruining with his mess right then? What did you do with the boy? Jasmine demanded, crossing her arms. What? Jafar looked genuinely confused. The one you had arrested. Oh, him. He's dead by now, I should think, but I came here for something far more important. Dead? Yes, dead, taken out of the desert and executed for laying hands on the royal princess, or whatever, Jafar said, impatiently waving his hands. Who gave you the permission to conduct the execution? The Sultan demanded. Jasmine was barely listening. She had known the boy for less than a day, but could summon his face at will, every detail of it, his large brown eyes, the crinkle into a smile so easily, the tiny scar just above the left side of his lip, the way his hair moved when he laughed. And it was all gone now. Dust. Because of her. Silence, you useless little man. I don't come here to discuss the fate of one street rat, Jafar said. Jasmine's father stared, speechless. No one treated the Sultan that way. Not even Jafar. Not even Jasmine. I came to tell you that your reign, I'm afraid, is now at an end. Watch your tongue, Jafar, the Sultan said warningly. Obviously, there's something wrong with your head today, but even you aren't above accusations of treason. What on earth do you mean? I mean, Jafar said, drawling his words, your reign has come to an end, and mine is beginning. Explain yourself, the Sultan exploded. His face turned red, and he balled his hands into fists at his side. Jasmine forced herself to pay attention. She was still in shock about the boy, but strange things seemed afoot everywhere in this situation. With pleasure, Jafar said. He reached dramatically into his cape and pulled out what looked very much like a beaten old brass lamp. Is this some kind of joke? The Sultan asked curiously. Is it my birthday today? Jasmine was also confused at first. Then, with the hot prickles of a creeping horror, she began to figure it out. Her nurses had told her tales of the magic of the Jinn and the things that lurked in the deep deserts. She'd also read many books of legends herself. The language etched in the base of the lamp was old. Very old. As if she was in a story herself, Jasmine watched Jafar do exactly what she knew he would. He took the cuffs off his sleeves and began to rub the lamp. At first nothing happened. Jasmine started to release the breath she had been holding. Then a tiny wisp of blue smoke began to curl out of the spout. The Sultan leaned forward, intrigued. "Oh no," Jasmine whispered. Suddenly, more smoke poured out of the lamp, like bees escaping a burning hive. Jafar held the lamp delicately away from his body. The Sultan jumped back. The lamp began to spark and shake. A tiny lightning bolt shot out of it. It began to scream. Or something began to scream. Something streaky and blue that shot out of the lamp and raced around the room like a wild dog that could fly. Jasmine turned and covered her face. Yow! The scream resolved into something human-sounding. The band of blue showed down and expanded and became a person. Half a person. Half of a very big blue person with golden earring and a golden wristbands of a slave. He was bald except for a tiny black top knot held with a golden thong and a beard with scrolly pointed tip. His eyes were almost shaped and glittery. His bottom half was smoke. 10,000 years, he cried in a booming voice. 10,000 years I have been imprisoned in the lamp. Genie, Jafar said with an oily smile. Genie, Oh, it feels so good to get out of there, the genie continued in a more normal voice, stretching and grinning. He spun, feeling the air around him. You know what it's like spending 10,000 years without a massage, or a bath, or a... Genie, Jafar interrupted. I am your master. Heed my words.